Can you hear me, John?
I could hear you, Jim. I think Dwayne was there too, was he? I'll see his name.
You betcha, guys. I'm here.
All right. Okay, folks.
I just have.
Hang on, Jim. I'm running this meeting here.
Okay.
Take your time. Your turn's coming up. Thank you. Okay, folks. I'd like to start the meeting with the Aboriginal Acknowledgement. We would like to acknowledge the land in which we're gathered is the traditional territory of the Kootenay, Silix, and Sinix peoples, is home to Métis and many diverse Aboriginal persons. We honour their connection to the land, rivers, and respect the importance of the environment to our strength as a community. And are there any late items? No. I'd like a motion then to adopt the agenda as presented. Moved by Councillor Renwick, second by Councillor Woodward. All in favour? Thank you very much. Adoption of the minutes of the previous meeting of February the 23rd. Moved by Councillor Page, seconded by Councillor Renwick. All in favour? Carried. Thanks very much. Next up is comments from the public, and I don't think we have any, Gabriel. So with that, we'll move on to presentations. And the first one up is Nelson Youth Baseball. Jim Siggety's on there, and Dwayne Sorensen. I'm not sure if there's anybody else from your group, Jim or Dwayne. I don't think so. So either one of you can take the floor at this point in time.
Okay, I can start, Mayor Dooley. The technical thing that I was about to mention is that I'm in Rossland with my family, and I can't get the internet connection to share my screen with you. So is it possible for you to control the presentation?
I'll check with Gabriel here.
Hi, Jim. I believe we can pull up your presentation. It might just take me a second, just given that it was not foreseen. And then in terms of scrolling through the slides, you'll have to give us audio instructions, but hold on one sec.
Okay.
Just take a second. So if you wanted to, if either you or Dwayne wanted to, just something you wanted to throw in here for a second or two while Damien's putting this together, you're welcome to do so.
Okay, let me just start with what
sorry. Go ahead.
On the first slide was just the title slide. I wanted to be clear about the objective today, and that is simply to seek approval from council to proceed with the Queen Elizabeth Park, our sponsor acknowledgement program. And the reason why we're here before you, here it is, speaking is because Craig Stanley, the former park superintendent, said that we would have to go before council to bring this matter up for discussion and approval.
Okay, fair enough, Jim. Go ahead. We got your presentation up. Thanks, Gabriel.
Okay, so there's more slides than I can go through in the time allotted, but I wanted to provide council with an understanding, a little background of the Baseball Association. So the first 6 slides or so are just of the Baseball Association. I'm not going to go through those because I will run out of time. I want to get to the end of it and what really matters. And that is the renovation, why we did it, what we did, and the fundraising program, and the reason why we'd like to acknowledge our sponsors on the outfield fence. So if I could just have you move to slide number 7, please. And that'll say Queen Elizabeth Park 2018. If you were to go to Queen Elizabeth Park in 2018 or about that time, you would see a number of signs like up or in all the parks up in the upper left-hand corner, which talk about enriching through quality parks and facilities. And if you were to walk around Queen Elizabeth Park at that time, and this is true of not only the city infrastructure, but also the baseball infrastructure. you would come away with the understanding that it was in a state of neglect. And I can go through, and I've showed a few photographs here on the lower left. There's the bathroom, some old signage, markings. In the upper center, there's the welcome to the Queen Elizabeth Park sign. There's beat up markings on the bathroom, nothing to code. The dugouts were small, below grade. They filled with water and they were locked. The water station is some 60 years old. It's in the alley. And it's next to the dog bag, which was the first stop for dogs. And then there's electrical infrastructure and the fencing. So clearly, something needed to be done. We took it upon ourselves, baseball organization, to do something. If you go to the 8th slide, what happened there, Gabe?
You got it. We've got it.
Oh, there it is. Okay. It's the same slide as before. The only difference is I put in photographs showing what the field looks like now and what it will look like in 2021 at the end of the season. So in the upper left, I've replaced the other slide with the safety netting, which went up, which would stop many, many hundreds of foul balls laying into the neighborhood. The bathrooms have been completely renovated, interior and exterior. We have new dugouts. They're larger, they're open, they fit a full team, and they're open to the community. Dugouts are one of the things that the community uses a lot. You see elementary school kids there. You see them running on our field. So it's a facility which they like to use a lot. We have all new fencing at the park. And in 2021, this season, we'll be putting up a scoreboard with the Queen Elizabeth Park sign on it and a new water station to replace the old fountain. Next slide. This is not to say that all we did was rebuild the city's infrastructure. We essentially rebuilt the entire field. I've showed two slides here. The one on the left is showing the multi-age diamond. It's a brand new baseball diamond, and it has baselines for the younger kids and the older kids. And then behind the center field fence, you'll see the new batting and pitching complex, which is a collegiate level facility, training facility. So next slide, please. So the next two slides are going to show the fundraising program. In simple numbers, to date, we've raised $375,000. We've put about $350 into the field. The big fundraiser is the Toronto Blue Jays. For those of you who may not know, the Toronto Blue Jays are owned by Rogers Communication. RDCK, through the federal gas tax, and Columbia Basin Trust, as always, have put in a tremendous amount of money. But what I think is really, really strong signal of support from the community are those areas, the pies shown in green and that kind of brown color. That's the in-kind and cash contributions from companies in Nelson. So the next slide will break those out. So if I could see that, next slide. So shown in green are the companies who provided cash donations, companies or people who provided cash donations, and shown in blue are those which are the in-kind contributions. And on the right side are all the people who have contributed. And that's about $100,000. So that's a significant amount of money from the community. So we would like to acknowledge these people. And one of the ways of doing it, particularly in a baseball field, are banners on an outfield fence. So we've designed a program whereby we would put a banner up for these folks at no cost. And there's no revenue. It's not like the boards at the hockey arena or at the indoor soccer. The Nelson baseball is getting no revenue. The money has come in. We've built the facility. It's a city-owned facility, so they've given money basically to the community for this. So what it would look like, next slide, please. This is a pretty much to scale working copy of what the banner program would look like. Left field, center field, and right field. And what we envision is we would put these banners up in early April, take them down in the middle of October for a period of about 3 years to recognize the sponsors. And then the final slide, just to summarize it and make it clear to everybody what we're asking for. We'd like approval to proceed from this. It is to acknowledge the sponsors in the renovation of Queen Elizabeth Park. It does not generate any revenue for the Nelson Baseball Association, and would like approval to proceed with a 3-year program with signage up from middle of April to the middle of October. And that's all we have to say. I'd be happy to answer any questions, or Dwayne for that matter.
Thank you very much,
You could take
Jim.
the presentation down if possible.
Thank you, Jim.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I have a question, Mr.
Yeah, go ahead, Cal.
Jim. Cal Renwick here. I grew up in 707 Cottonwood Street, and Queen Elizabeth Ballpark was my playground for 19 or 20 years, as well as, I spent a lot of time with Nelson minor baseball and coaching and what have you. And I just want to say, on behalf of myself and my family, who my mother and father are no longer with us, but they would be so happy and so proud to see what you have done and accomplished at Queen Elizabeth Ballpark, not to mention Lions Park as well. But you've done just such a great job there, and enhanced the neighborhood, and made that a better park, not just for baseball, but for everybody. And I can't get across enough what a great job you guys have done, and all the volunteers that have helped you, and the donations and the in-kind and what have you. Fantastic job. Good on you.
Well, thank you very much, Cal. I look at your house every day, or your former house every day.
Yeah, there's many a window broken up there, Cal. Before we go any further, Jim, just so you and Dwayne are clear, this is a meeting for presentations, and for us to make a decision on this, we would have it on the agenda for the next meeting, just so you know.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any further questions or comments for Councillor Page?
I'm not as eloquent as Councillor Renwick, but I spent the first decade here on 6th Street, just above that. And so I've seen quite the change just in that time. I'm just wondering, Chair, should we have a motion to refer this to the next meeting? I think we do vote on that, don't we?
Absolutely.
So I'll make that motion.
You can do that if you wish. It's not necessary, but it'll come on this next agenda regardless. So, if you wish, you're welcome to do so.
I'll make the motion, because that's how it should happen.
Yeah. Seconded by Councillor Morrison. All in favour? Carried. Okay. Any further comments for Dwayne or Jim?
Just an amazing job.
Yeah, amazing. Absolutely amazing. And thanks, Jim and Dwayne, for your leadership. I remember you coming to my office here to talk this over before you even started, and I was really inspired by your excitement and dedication to the project. So thanks very much for, like many other groups in our communities, most of the things that we take credit for is stuff done by volunteer groups in our community. So thanks very much. It's just fantastic what's happened there. And also at Lions. And by the way, is there going to be baseball this spring at all?
Yes,
do you know?
We have a registration that's bordering on overflowing. So
Yeah.
our COVID plan's approved, and how it actually looks and what we get to play is sort of up in the air still. But
Yeah.
we will be out there practicing by hopefully the middle of April,
Oh,
whenever the
fantastic.
fields are open.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it's great for sure.
Good. Okay. Well, thanks very much. Really appreciate it. And everybody on council here has been keeping track of your progress through the media and by driving by there on occasion. So thanks very much. And
Thanks for your time, guys.
we'll talk to you
Thank
soon.
you.
Yeah. Take care.
Thanks. Have a good night.
Good night.
All right. West Kootenay Renewables, and we have a presentation here for the West Kootenay EcoSociety up next. And we have David Reed. Are you on your own, David?
It's just me tonight,
Just
Mayor Dooley.
One man show. Okay. You've got the floor.
Thank you very much. Well, I
Yes,
want to start by saying thank you to the mayor and council for the opportunity to address you. And I am speaking on behalf of West Kootenay EcoSociety as well as the West Kootenay 100% Renewable Energy Working Group. This project has been a long 2-year process that's involved many hours and attention from several members of City of Nelson staff, as well as council members, as well as council members and staff from right around the region. It's a pretty robust process, and I just want to take a minute to share with you the process that we went through to develop the plan. I know you've had the plan in your agenda packet, and I apologize for all of that reading material. I'm sure you read every word of those 200 odd pages, but I do appreciate you taking the time to review it and have me here, and I'm happy to answer any questions as we go along. So hopefully my share process will work very smoothly. So far, so good. One never really knows. So the West Kootenay Renewable Energy Plan began in April 2019. And the general principle behind the Renewable Energy Plan is that switching to a renewable energy plan benefits our communities in a lot of really significant ways. First of all, in terms of health, we know that there are health impacts associated with fossil fuels, asthma, lung disease, heart disease, mental illness, mental health problems related to the sound of fossil fuel, et cetera. So switching to renewables can provide a lot of health benefits, and there are some pretty dramatic statistics about the number of lives that are cost and the financial cost of that. Community safety, I think, is an important one that the City of Nelson, I know, recognizes very clearly. The risk of severe wildfires, precipitation events, lack of precipitation events, pest outbreaks, and I know the City of Nelson is already engaged in some great work on addressing some of those safety concerns. But if we can accelerate that switch to renewable energy, we're going to have less of those risks. And then, of course, economic vitality. Switching to renewable energy means saving money that we're now spending on energy that we can then spend on other things. Creating jobs locally, whether it's switching people over from fossil fuels to renewable energy, and also in conservation. We already know that the EcoSave program has created some jobs in the city of Nelson already. And then also renewable energy, whether it's installing solar panels or managing the energy. Again, Nelson Hydro is a great example of local jobs from renewable energy. And that has also means that we have stable, locally controlled energy pricing. And you only have to look at the price of gas and how that changes over time to see how that can really impact families throughout the Kootenays if they're depending on those fossil fuels. So participating communities, we have 9 local governments that signed on to this plan or to this process. And so Castlegar, Caslow, Nelson, New Denver, the Regional District of Central Kootenay, City of Rossland, Slocan, Silverton, and Warfield all signed on, and Fruitvale recently signed on, made the pledge to reach 100% renewable energy by 2050. And we're in discussions now with the Regional District of Kootenay boundary. So that's very exciting to see the momentum of this regional approach building over time. And so we've been grateful to all these communities and their participation in the process. So speaking of process, this is when you're looking at renewable energy for an entire region with tens of thousands of residents and all of the diversity that we have in terms of businesses and community members, it's important to have a robust process that can take in input. So what we did is we convened a working group, and that included staff and elected officials from each of the 9 participating local governments. We hired a consultant called Community Energy Association to provide baseline data. We gathered community input to make sure that we were getting all the information we needed. And then we also convened 6 expert panels to help make sure that we didn't, again, miss anything critical. And then when we had a draft of the plan, we circulated it to all the participating local governments so that they could review it internally before it went out to the public. We really wanted to make sure, because this plan it's not EcoSociety's plan, it's all of the participating governments' plan together. So we wanted to make sure we didn't have any, glaring errors or anything that a local government wouldn't want to have in there. We get got more community input once we had a draft to circulate, and then finally we completed the full plan. And so far, of the 9 local governments, all of them have approved the plan, except for Regional District of Central Kootenay, and that they're in a process to do that soon. Silverton and I believe New Denver also has not, and then Nelson, as you know, obviously has approved the Nelson Next plan. So we'll get to that in just a minute. So this is a not very interesting diagram of all of the inputs that went into making this plan. I think the important thing to consider is that we really just did try to have a broad range of input to make sure that we were representing the real diversity of our communities. You can see here some of our Nelson City Council members as part of this working group. And as I said, we had it was self-selection. So several Nelson City councilors opted to participate. I believe Brittany, Keith, Jesse, Rick, and Janice all participated at different points in the process. And it was, of course, wonderful to have all of that information. So first thing we had to do was come up with a baseline. So you can see here, this pie chart breaks down what Nelson's emissions are coming from. So this was prepared by the Community Energy Association based on quite a large list of data sources. And to me, the thing that jumps right out is obviously the vast majority of our emissions is coming from mobility fuels, just getting around day to day. And then the next obviously giant chunk is from natural gas from heating our homes. So those are the 2 obvious opportunities that this city of Nelson and the community of Nelson have to reduce emissions and reduce that carbon pollution. And we also, part of this baseline, were able to extrapolate to a certain degree, looking at how energy was used and also how energy dollars were being spent. So you can see here we are again, that green bar is showing you the estimated cost or estimated expenditure. So again, this shows so much of our energy, some of which are energy dollars, is being spent on these passenger vehicles, and of course that's supporting some local jobs and gas stations and such. But imagine if we could save some of that money and have more of that money going to support more local jobs, supporting our economy. So to make sure that we had a clear and shared understanding, we had a wide range of presentations, and this is presentations to the working group from these experts from right around the country about how to transition to renewable energy, whether in terms of buildings, transportation, waste, et cetera, generating renewables. And I think that helped create the strong foundation for for the framework that we use, which is called the Big Moves. And this is was developed by Community Energy Association as part of their climate leadership playbook. And so basically the plan goes through these 4 categories and says, what can we do in our region to address transportation, buildings, waste, and energy generation in terms of electrifying passenger vehicles, shifting beyond the car to public and active transportation, addressing commercial transportation, energy use, new buildings, existing buildings, closing the loop on waste, and diversifying energy sources. Now, again, I want to emphasize the city of Nelson is already a leader in so many of these areas, but that doesn't mean that it's not helpful to plan and to develop an action plan. And that's why we're so excited about Nelson Next. And so recognizing that Nelson Next was moving ahead basically at the same time as this regional plan, we were very grateful to have Kate Leticia's participation in the working group. And she worked very closely with my predecessor and with me to help figure out how to make the public engagement as well as the planning efforts be collaborative and useful to both of the planning efforts. And so ultimately what we decided, and I'm gonna kind of jump to the punchline here, is that the Nelson Next plan is a great plan for the city of Nelson. It's built on a tremendous amount of community input and knowledge. And so the regional plan simply refers to the Nelson Next plan and says, hey, for Nelson, this is the plan that Nelson should pursue to reduce their carbon pollution and transition to renewable energy. So, as I said, we have these local experts come in, and these were quite a range of people participated in this to help us craft the text that would explain both the opportunities and the constraints for transitioning to renewable energy in our area. We're not Vancouver, we're not Toronto, we're not San Francisco, we're a rural region. And so we have a number of, when we're looking at the climate change plans that are developed in those areas, we have to do a lot of thinking about how to make it work here. So it was really helpful to have the participation of local experts, particularly in the buildings, transportation, and renewable generation fields. And that included Alex Love, when he was working at the City of Nelson. He gave us some great feedback to help us understand the policy framework. And it was very illuminating for us. And we tried to capture all of that in the draft plan. So the working group, which included several members of City of Nelson staff and council, had an opportunity to review the draft plan, and then we gave it to these local experts. They gave us their comments, and then we had a local government internal review where we gave it back to local governments to say, hey, here's how we incorporated all of your comments. As you can imagine, working with 9 different local governments, you get a lot of different comments, and it was a very interesting challenge to try to take all of those different comments and figure out how to integrate them. So we gave the plan back to local governments to say, hey, this is what we did with all of your comments and the responses from the experts. Before we give it to the public, what do you think? So we're grateful for Kate and Alex at the City of Nelson. Alex Thumb gave us some great feedback on the draft plan. We also provided it to City Manager Kevin Cormack so that he could have a look at it. And obviously all of the local the participants in the working group, the city councilors who were involved with that, also had the opportunity to review the plan at that point. So finally, in October of 2020, we released the plan to the public. We hosted a series of online webinars and offered a regional survey to get input from people about how feasible and impactful these proposed actions would be. Now, again, because Nelson Next was also doing a tremendous amount of community engagement, it did not make sense for us to host a webinar in Nelson, just as City of Nelson staff was working on a draft plan. And similarly, rather than send Nelson residents to the survey that we created for the region, we sent them a link to the survey that Nelson Next hosted. So as I said, it was quite collaborative, and we did everything we could to sort of cross-pollinate and cross-promote to make sure that anyone who was interested in renewable energy and climate change had an opportunity to shape the intersection of these plans. And finally, the plan was released on December 1st. And I think the first municipality to adopt the plan, or to approve the plan, excuse me, was Castlegar, and I think it was early December. So it's been very exciting to see this plan build momentum across the region and to work with these local governments to begin implementation, because really that's where the rubber meets the road. So how does this fit in with Nelson Next? Well, Nelson Next is Nelson's climate change plan, and the way we see it is that if the City of Nelson pursues all of the actions that are outlined in Nelson Next, the City of Nelson will get as close to 100% renewable energy as it's possible to get, given the current technology and context, the policy context. So for the purposes of the 100% renewable energy plan, as I said, in the plan itself, it gives some information about Nelson. It gives the baseline data that I showed you earlier. It gives a projection if Nelson does everything that can be done within the current policy and technological constraints, what will be the resulting carbon pollution. But ultimately it says, in terms of if you want to look at and see what actions Nelson should take to move toward 100% renewable energy, all you have to do is go look at Nelson Next, because all of the mitigation steps that are included in Nelson Next are really well aligned with what we would expect to see in terms of moving toward 100% renewable energy. So since these plans are so closely aligned, what we're asking is that the City of Nelson also approve the 100% renewable energy plan that's based on this whole regional process involving 8 other local governments. So why should Nelson do that? Well, it supports this regional collaboration that contributes to everyone's success. Not only does it continue this momentum for a regional approach, because let's face it, if Nelson does a bunch of things on climate mitigation, or adaptation for that matter, and nobody else does, then we're not making as much progress as we need to make in the long term. So we really need these other communities to be participating and moving forward with their actions, and not all of them have the resources and the commitment that Nelson has put into the Nelson Next plan. So Nelson participating and continuing to participate in this regional collaboration really helps build that momentum, as well as providing a role model for other communities. And we'd love to see Nelson be the next local government to approve the plan. It also provides this great platform for synergy on joint purchases. So if there's fleet vehicles that need to be purchased, or even bulk orders of electric leaf blowers or operational equipment for the cities, by purchasing together, it's possible to save money for our taxpayers. Provincial advocacy is an important component, as you know, of municipal work, and particularly when it comes to climate change. When you're looking at BC hydro rates, or the BC UC rates, excuse me, the future plans for Fortis natural gas, all of these things, if we have a regional approach, I think that makes our voice stronger when we're talking to the province. Then it also gives us an opportunity to tap into the data analysis. There's definitely an economy of scale. If you're doing data analysis for just one community versus a whole region, I think that there's an opportunity to do more and to do better. And finally, it reaffirms the City of Nelson's contributions and role in developing the plan, which have been significant, as well as acknowledging the great work that has already taken place for Nelson Next. So that's why we're asking the City Council to approve the West Kootenay 100% renewable energy plan. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Page, I can see your hand. We'll pull down your presentation. David,
I
if
am.
you can, please, and that gives everybody
Yes.
a bit of screen time.
There we go.
There we go. So, Councillor
Yeah.
Page, you're up.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to first and foremost thank the work that has been done here, both by our regional partners and by the EcoSociety and the consultants at Over Community Energy Association. I know we had a self-select group of councillors that participated through the breadth of this engagement, but it's been an intense and long engagement that has, I think, unearthed quite a lot of solid work. And I would like to move to refer this to a regular business meeting for adoption as a sub-plan of Nelson Next.
I'll second that.
Okay, second by Councillor Luchtenberg. Any questions or comments on that? Councillor Woodward.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, David. I feel like something that really hit me as you were talking was that, like Nelson is often, ahead of the curve in a bunch of areas, but we're a little bit of an island sometimes. I feel like that we're doing all this stuff, but we're a very small community, and it's fantastic what we can do in our small community. And I think, something I've been involved in recently is housing as a regional approach, because, we can have great housing policy and development here in Nelson, but that's, it's again, a very small area. So I feel like something that really hit me was this idea of a regional approach, that we can compound all that we know in a regional way. And so I really I like the linkages that you're making there between what Nelson is doing and trying to do for itself, but that we should also support this regional response to climate change, because of course our the issues don't end at the edge of our town. So I just wanted to thank you for that and kind of piecing that together. Thank you for your enormous amount of work. I know you put a lot of time into this, and Kate put an enormous amount of time into our plan. So thank you for all those efforts, and I look forward to seeing a regional approach to this problem.
So before we go any further, thanks, Councillor Woodward. Before we go any further, we're just talking now about referring this to the next meeting. We're not going to debate the merits of it at this point. If we want to hear more from David, that's fair enough, but our time's a little limited at the moment. So I'm just going to call the question referring, and all in favor? Carried. Thank you very much. So is there any further questions for David at this point? Oh, Councillor Renwick, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. David, thank you very much for that. And thank you for the 233-page report. That was spectacular. I do have to admit, I didn't get all the way through it. That's a few nights reading. But one thing that I did notice in there that I found a little, I don't know whether to use the word shocking is correct or not, but as Councillor Woodward said, we do an awful lot in Nelson, and we are ahead of the curve. And I think the region, with accepting this program, is also doing their part. But I did notice that there was one chart that you had there. There's only 4 other communities in BC and only 5 across Canada. Now, is that just because that's all you know of, or are people really slow on the uptake on a program like this?
Thanks for the question. That number has increased since the report was published. And I think the Canada is a little bit slow on the uptake, and I'm not sure why that might be. But I know there are more than 150 municipalities around the world that have adopted this pledge to reach 100% renewable energy. And of course, it's essentially the foundation of the Paris Climate Accord. So it's certainly not a new or unusual step. I think one of the things that we're trying to innovate here is the impact that local government has. And I think that for a long time, there's been this idea that, well, it's not our problem for local governments. Let's try to get people to drive less and change their light bulbs. But really, we really need provincial policy and federal policy to drive the transition to 100% renewable energy. And that is absolutely true. We do need provincial and federal policy, but we also need local policy. And I think, the City of Nelson adopting the STEP code is a great example of that. I think the City of Nelson's EcoSave program, another great example of providing incentives and encouraging people, educating people to get out ahead of it and to really see the benefits for our community. And I think there's a lot of fear and paralysis from that fear about the potential impacts of climate change. And that's why this plan is really about all the benefits that accrue by transitioning to renewable energy. So we're not debating the impacts of climate change so much as saying okay, all of that aside, let's look at all the great things we can accomplish for our community by doing this transition. So, even if, driving cars, for example, turns out to be fine, the reality if we get more people taking the bus, if we get more people walking and biking to do their daily errands, it's going to make life better for people in Nelson. I mean, I'm one of them who, the cars that drive by my house, if there are fewer cars or quieter cars, that makes my life better. If I have an easier time riding my bike downtown so I can run my errands or hop on the bus, so much the better. If I can hop in a shuttle and get up to Whitewater, that makes my life better, saves me money, and makes I think our community a better place. So that's really, I think, where we're trying to get to. And I think that's exactly the same framing of Nelson Next. This is the future of Nelson, and I think it's a really bright future.
Councillor Lockenberg.
Well, and I just if I may, David, to add to that, to Councillor Renwick's question, I think a number of municipalities have made a commitment to 100% renewable, but they have made other commitments to emissions reductions. In some jurisdictions, it's hard for them to see how they go their energy sources to be 100% renewable because they don't have the hydro capacity that we do here in BC. And so they would make up for that by doing carbon sequestration or carbon capture of some kind to cover off the amount of emissions they're creating through their power generation. So you have many municipalities across the country that have committed to something similar to this, just not that 100% renewable target.
Thank you. All right, thanks very much, David. Good job. A lot of, I must admit, that was the one thing that did catch there was a number of things caught my eye, but as Councillor Renwick mentioned, I thought, holy cow, are we the only ones in this game here? We had, Charlottetown, Edmonton, Guelph, and Oxford County, and Regina were the only ones outside of our little neck of the woods that were even thinking in these terms. So, but anyways, it's good, and I like your analysis there at the end. It creates a healthier place to live and everything else. The more we can reduce our emissions, there's no question about it. So, but from a marketing perspective, the whole thing is amazing because if it doesn't rain, it's climate change, and if it does rain, it's climate change. So it's interesting scenario. But thanks very much, and we're actually, as you said earlier, somewhat ahead of the curve with our Nelson Next program, and I think Rick hit the nail on the head when he said it's pretty easy to be cocky out here in British Columbia when you're generating 99% of your power by hydro, but we do have that advantage, and we might as well leverage it, right?
That's right.
Yeah. Thank you. Take care.
Thank
Thanks a
you.
lot, David.
You as well.
All right, folks, up next is the regional plan for transit. And I think we have, who do we have on from BC Transit tonight?
We have a cast of characters. I myself am Seth Wright. I'm the Government
And we-
Relations Manager.
Okay, and Adriana, I think on there somewhere.
Yes, hi there, it's
There
me.
you are, okay, I see you now, yeah. And that's it? Just the two of
And
you?
coming up for our second presentation, we have James Wadsworth
Okay,
to speak to the Transit Exchange.
excellent, good. All right, well, at this point, both of you have the floor, and you're welcome to start your presentation. I don't think you need anything from us to get it up on the screen, do you?
No, I think we should be good.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Seth, or whomever's leading it. You're welcome to
Sure,
start
let me
when
see
you're
if I
ready.
can. Great. So thank you so much, Mayor and Council, for this opportunity to speak today. I am the new Government Relations Manager. You might remember Chelsea Mossy, who previously occupied my position. She's been realigned to another system, and I came over from the planning department at BC Transit most recently, but I have a background in local government land use planning before that. And I'm happy to be able to speak to you tonight and introduce a little bit about the West Kootenay Transit Future Service Plan, which Adriana will speak to the details, and I'll just give you a little bit of an introduction. I will say that the Transit Future Service Plan was already presented to the January 25th meeting of the West Kootenay Transit Committee, and we're bringing it here for endorsement to your to council, and hopefully it'll get forwarded for consideration at your next council meeting. And ultimate adoption. And at the end of the day, it is council that makes decisions on expansions. So we want your support, and hopefully you can champion this plan and champion the expansions in the plan and prioritize them as we move forward in the coming months and years to build out the transit network that there's such great demand for in Nelson. With that, I will present my outline for the next few minutes, which is a little bit of an introduction by way of a bit of background on BC Transit. I won't go into too much depth, but I just have a couple slides, and then I'll turn to a little bit of performance and ridership conversation, and then I'll hand it off to Adriana to speak to the Transit Future Service Plan. She'll talk a bit about the process of how we got here and how we got to a concluded plan. She'll identify what the service change priorities from a short-term to a long-term perspective are, and we'll mention some next steps for moving forward. So whenever I do these presentations, I always like to start off by talking about roles and responsibilities because
Seth?
the BC, yep.
I'm just stopping you. Are you meaning to be sharing your slides?
Yeah, oh, sorry. What am I sharing?
That's your face right now.
Oh, okay.
And you're doing such a good job.
Yeah.
Your
There we
words
go.
drew a picture. I could see it.
There we go. It's coming now, Seth. You're good.
Okay. Let's go into this.
You can maximize that.
Those were in our package.
Are you
Right.
seeing it now?
Yeah.
Maximized?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't
So,
think we
pardon me.
Seth, we didn't miss much because those are actually in our package anyway, so.
There we go.
Yeah.
So the BC Transit Partnership Model places the provincial government, I tend to think, at the top because they place themselves at the top, but they set the provincial public policy objectives through the mandate letters that we receive, and they also provide the large volume of funding that they provide. They provide that to BC Transit. We administer transit through partnership both with the local governments and with the local operators, who are a blend of companies that provide transit service in some systems, and in a few, such as Nelson and Nanaimo, we have municipal operating companies where local city staff provide the transit service and drive the buses. So local government in this arrangement or partnership model is responsible for setting the local funding model through taxation, sets routes and service levels, which is part of what this discussion tonight is about. setting fares and managing the sale of fare products, establishing and maintaining bus stops, shelters, and amenities, makes sense as the road authority, carries out land use planning function, which can obviously make transit more accessible and make it more difficult to get people on buses if it's low density or high density. Determine service expansion priorities. So in our 1 to 3 year, what's typically been called the TIPS process, we outline and identify expansion priorities for where we want to add service. Approve transit-related agreements, such as our annual operating agreement to continue to deliver service. Promotes ridership with BC Transit, working with us to provide marketing and branding to advance and retain our ridership, and delivers transit ridership education. The transit service funding model is fairly generous, and I would always like to highlight that BC is fairly unique in North America. I think New Jersey is the only other provincial or state level jurisdiction where they have support across the board for local governments, and the funding model in BC is good. It provides about 47% of conventional transit and 67% of custom transit. And so in Nelson, we have a conventional system. So effectively routes 1 to 4 are part of the Nelson conventional system for the city of Nelson. And from that 53% or so that the city pays, local government retains 100% of the fare and pass revenues, and that offsets that, so it shrinks it down further. And to characterize a little bit on a high level what the Nelson transit system is comprised of, it's 11,750 annual service hours, which probably means more to folks like me and Adriana than it does to you, but suffice it to say that's a pretty good sized transit system for a community of its size. And it equals just 11,750 hours of drivers driving around buses with people getting on and off them. The system is operated by the city of Nelson, as mentioned earlier. It's comprised of 6 buses for heavy duty and 2 medium duty buses, which serve the 4 routes defined here on the left. And the Nelson Conventional also incorporates the regional district of Central Kootenay routes 10 and 99, which are served by the City of Nelson buses and staff, but are paid through a cost-sharing arrangement with the Regional District of Central Kootenay. City of Nelson is a bit anomalous in the BC Transit model in that at present there's no handy dart service. It's unusual in the BC Transit model to have a conventional only. Usually we have either paratransit, which is a blended model, or conventional and custom, which is sort of our term for handy dart. I wanted to turn to a little bit of a ridership performance chart here, and this is shows year-over-year comparison between 2019 and 2020, and we see 2019 in blue, and this is all systems across the province. We see the first week of January is a little bit lower as people return from Christmas holidays, but it increases, and we have a steady and even decline over a few months as summer conspires, and then we have a big jump in September where we have students returning to school and some variability there. In 2020, we saw a precipitous drop in early March, and when the province in particular discouraged non-essential travel, and we've seen an incremental increase over the remaining months of the 2020 calendar year. This just sort of suggests where we're at with transit and highlights, gives some context to what we're actually seeing in Nelson, which is that we experienced a fairly significant decline. These are charts showing the 4 routes that make up the Nelson City service, as well as the 10 and the 99 on the right. What you can see is that the route 2 in particular does extremely well and suffered a little bit from the pandemic and the discouraging of travel, but only dropped about 50% at that key time when we saw most of our service across the province decline by 75% or more in ridership. And similarly on the routes 1 and 3. And so there's a lot of buoyancy in ridership in Nelson, and I think this is a really strong sign, and there's a lot of commitment. Meanwhile, on the 99, we saw quite a precipitous drop, evidenced and likely resulting from the drop in students traveling to post-secondary to Selkirk College, but we didn't see quite as significant of a drop on the Route 10. And this shows the same metrics in a performance-based, so sort of an intensity-based metric per boarding hour, whereas the previous chart is average weekday boardings. So this is on a service hour, so it's evaluated. Obviously, the Route 4, for instance, doesn't operate for many service hours a day, so it improves this when you take it by performance. And we see similar theme that the 2 and 3 perform extremely well and have proven fairly buoyant, as well as even the 1 and the 10 and 99 are pretty close at 10. I should point out that this height of number of boardings per revenue hour suggests that there's crush loads, and so that people are squishing onto the bus. I think that that we know at transit, when we see those loads, people are not comfortable on the buses, and so we have a fair degree of concern, and certainly we want to avoid that level of capacity as we recover from the pandemic. And so it'd be great to provide service that accommodates those loads without having people squished together and too uncomfortable. Sorry, with that, I'm going to pass it off to my colleague Adriana to speak to the remainder of the slides.
Great, thank you, Seth. Hello, everyone. Good evening. So thank you so much for having us here, and I really enjoyed working on this plan. So thank you for having me there, and I see a few familiar faces in there here tonight. Anyhow, so with that, I'm just going to jump into this. We've got a fair bit of ground to cover, and I'll try and be swift with it. So the purpose of this plan is basically to inform future transit decision making for the Kootenay Lake West, Castlegarden area, and City of Nelson transit systems. Back in 2011 and 2012, there was actually 3 plans that were created for all of the systems that are today in the One Riders Guide. And so I've got those on the left-hand side. And those 3 separate documents then fed into 2 other documents, one of which was a service review for the Greater Trail area, and the other one is this plan that we are now working on. We did begin work on this in 2018. However, owing to some turnover and of course the pandemic, there have been some delays. So we are now just wrapping it up, but it is meant to be the counterpart to that trail service review that was completed in 2016. Moving forward, the idea is that in the same way as you share one rider's guide for your whole West Kootenay area, the future plans will be comprehensive and it will be one document. So we're sort of slowly moving together to try and have this be as comprehensive and rational from a regional scale as possible. In terms of the areas that this plan applies to, if you were to draw a line diagonally just south of Castlegar to just south of Salmo, that would be anything north of there that is in the Rider's Guide map would be part of this plan that we are presenting this evening. Next slide, please. Great, thanks. So this is a little bit of basic transit 101. The transit plan will identify the service hours and the type of service that we are looking to put out there. And by service hours, I mean the hours that the bus is on the road with the driver behind it. And by type of service, I mean services like your connector or your local routes. In some cities, there's frequent routes. And as you probably can imagine, in order to make our buses last their full lifetimes, we actually limit the amount of kilometers they're permitted every year. And that's in order to make them live the life of their, what's the word here? The lifespan that we have designated for them. And anyhow, and so the service hours and the type of service determine the fleet that you need. So for a certain number of hours, it's usually about 2,500 hours, we'll need one bus. And then you also need a backup bus in case that breaks down. That's called a spare ratio. And then the number of buses that you have out in your fleet then determine what kinds of garage facilities you have, because there needs to be a ratio of maintenance bays and parking space for all of your fleet. So these are all very interrelated. Seth, if you could push next, I think I've got some arrows that are going to pop up. Yeah, there we go. And then by virtue, these items also constrain how many service hours and the type of service that can go out. Please leave it here, Seth. Thank you. So if you don't have enough garage parking spaces or garage maintenance spaces, that limits how many buses you can have in your fleet. How many buses you have in your fleet also defines the top end of how much bus service you can have out on the roads. All right, next, please. Great. And so this is a pyramid where we basically try to ensure that we have the foundations of that bottom blue block as strong as possible before we would want to consider the next level. So your system right now, we are doing really well on achieving that bottom blue block. The service is reliable, it's safe, it's accessible, it's operating fairly sustainably. But where we are having some challenges is that middle center block, the green block, where right now the buses are experiencing some overcrowding problems. And so that's something that we need to address before we can really look at adding more onto it and expanding it. And that's just a foundational service. We want to fix what's broken before we add on to it. Next slide, please. So this is the plan timeline. So we started in 2018-19, so December, January 2019, and most of the plan work was actually conducted throughout 2019. And then we were aiming to have it presented in winter of 2020, so around this time last year. Unfortunately, we did have the COVID situation arise, so we are behind. But it's actually been illuminating in some ways. And I'll talk more to that as we flow through. Next slide, please. So the plan engagement had 3 phases. We conducted a first round of targeted stakeholders workshops. There were 8 of them that were conducted throughout the plan area. So we were out as far as Nakusp and out in we had 2 sessions in Nelson, and actually, Seth, if you want to hit the little next one there. There we go. So we had 2 sessions in Nelson. One of the sessions, oops, go back, please. One of the sessions in Nelson was held at the Hume, and I think a number of you were probably there for that one. It was pretty toasty. We actually had a much bigger response of interest than we were expecting, so that was really awesome. That was in April of 2019. And then in November of 2019, we held 9 open house events, again, throughout the region. And within Nelson, we were at the library and then also at the lakeside. And we were also outdoors at Playmore Junction. So we were really all over the place. And we had 143 people participate in that. And at the same time, we were running an online survey. There's always folks who would like to come out, but cannot always make it. So we had the online survey. Amongst the online survey participants, we had about 330 residents of Nelson. And then because the end of November is possibly the worst time to speak to students, we came back in January to do Selkirk College. And so we did 5 on-campus events, and we did some fairly detailed surveying of the students to understand their movements and ridership patterns. Of these campus events, 3 of them were held in Nelson. So we did 2 at the 10th Street campus and then 1 up at Silver King. Next slide, please. So this is a context of your system since 2013. And if the numbers look really big, it's because the numbers that are on this graph actually relate to what is in your rider's guide. And so the rider's guide for the West Kootenay service encompasses the City of Nelson Transit System, the Kootenay Lake West Transit System. What I have drawn is a smaller line there across designating where Nelson is. And the story that this chart tells me is that from 2013 until 2019, the system-wide ridership grew by about 60%. And meanwhile, the hours that were put into the system stayed relatively flat. If you could hit the next button once, please, Seth. Great. And so if we're looking at Nelson specifically, oops, go back one, sorry. Nelson specifically, you went from about 270,000 rides annually in 2013 to about 460,000 rides. That represents an increase of 69%. So there have been some really dramatic increases in ridership within the city. And again, the service hours have stayed relatively constant throughout the system. Next button, please. And then this is a little bit of plan context of how folks get around within the communities that are covered in the plan. So this data is taken from the census, and the census data, it looks at how people commute to and from work. And what struck me as very interesting is that people who live outside of your urban areas, outside of the city of Nelson, and who live in the unincorporated designated communities, places like Winlaw, actually have a much higher propensity to use transit than those who reside within the cities. And that is a little bit of a flip to what we're accustomed to seeing, certainly given how good of a, or how well-resourced your transit system is. It was a surprise to me, but then we started looking a little bit more deeply at some of the ridership patterns, and we realized that your services are very, very, very well used at certain times of the day, and those are often the same times of day that there are commuters wanting to travel. So if we are to try and tempt more people who live within the urban areas to use their bus to get to work on a regular basis, we need to make sure we can accommodate that and make the buses comfortable at times of day when they wish to commute. And yeah, so that was really interesting to me. And then the graph on the right-hand side is the population growth by type of area. So we tend to be seeing strong growth in Castlegar and Nelson. We're also seeing really strong growth in these unincorporated communities, which is, I find interesting. You have some really interesting small communities that are very historic with beautiful little grid frameworks that are just lovely for walking. And yet the growth outside of the urban centers seems to be going more into the rural areas. So that was fascinating for me to see. And also, you know, people who are moving to these rural areas, they will have longer commute times. And in some ways, whether they choose to drive or take an e-car or even take the bus, it is an energetically longer travel distance. So there's a few observations that we were looking at. Next slide, please. Now we're getting into some of the outcomes of the plan. So you'll remember that earlier in my slides, I was discussing the different types of service, how there are connector routes, there are frequent routes in some places. So within Nelson, you primarily had two types of routes that were operating. You have the regional connector, you have the 99 that comes in. That's a very high profile route. There's a lot of attention on that route. Then you have your local routes, which are the 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then there are also some of the routes that come in from outside of the community. So the 10 and the 20, for instance, which we would put in a different category from the 99. The 99 is a very specific purpose. However, based on the really strong ridership that you have on the Route 2, and Seth showed you that diagram, and also really strong ridership that we see on the Route 31 in Castlegar, we have chosen to reclassify those two routes into a new category that you previously didn't have. We call it frequent transit, and that would allow us to improve the frequency on those routes in that category, and aim for service levels that are every 20 to 60 minutes. And previously what had been identified for Nelson was an overall target of making all of your routes 20-minute frequencies. But if we examine where the demand and the patterns are, it is not necessarily efficient to allocate your resources that way if so much of the demand is on the Route 2. So this helps us set ourselves up for creating that much higher level of service that will match the demand that is found on that route. And also start to standardize some of the service levels that are found throughout that one rider's guide. So Nelson in some ways is really quite well resourced. In some ways you're almost a victim of your success because you're so well resourced, the ridership is responding, you're getting rides. But now we need to try and improve that. At the same time, if we look at communities like Castlegar, their Route 31, which is the route that serves a lot of the shopping and employment destinations like Safeway and a lot of the apartments and higher density parts of town, that route wraps up at 6 o'clock at night. And meanwhile, here in Nelson, the 2 wraps up at 10:30. So in addition to addressing some of the spots where we're seeing critical and high volumes like the Route 2, we also need to try and work on creating greater equity for people in other communities so that they can have a more predictable level of service. So that's sort of one of the key changes in this plan is introducing that frequent transit layer. And then next. So I had mentioned these different types of transit service and these different layers. I like colors, so we've color coded them mostly throughout this plan. And so the orange are the connector routes, so the 98 and the 99. The teal is meant to be the frequent transit route, although I noticed I missed coloring at that. And the dark blue are the local transit routes that are ridership routes. And then the green ones are the coverage routes. And then you'll see other colors there. The next several slides will show you critical fixes for the whole plan. However, we have shaded off those that are less relevant to people living in Nelson. And so in terms of the critical fixes, the 99 connector, it is definitely something that we are very concerned with in terms of the volumes that it was seeing before COVID. That route is definitely dependent on the college. So we are working as closely as we can with the college to determine what will be happening with them this September. But as soon as they revert back to what they had up and on campus in 2019, there will be crush problems on that bus. And we may also have people who are less reluctant or who are less comfortable being in crush load situations due to the pandemic. So that's something to be aware of. That is our top fix within the whole system that we've identified. Next down the list, we are looking at extending the 404 evening trip of the number 10 bus all the way out to Balfour. The next trip after that, the bus is at capacity, and there's a lot of demand to get out to that, to the ferry and to Balfour. So if we can extend that 404 trip from ending at 6 Mile to ending at Balfour, it will give people one more choice of how they can get to Balfour. They can maybe take that earlier trip if they're able to. And then number 5 there you see is the Route 2 Fairview. And that is specifically addressing those really high volumes that we're seeing on the Route 2 that Seth pointed out to you. In the morning, there's a time of day when there's 60 rides per hour that are happening. And that is beyond what we see on some routes in the Victoria system, for instance. And it's definitely cause for concern because of the conditions we can see that might be generating for the customers. Next slide, please. And then one of the other so now we're moving into the short-term changes. And of the short-term changes or the short-term service priorities, The ones that will have interest for Nelson is the proposal to introduce basic service between Salmo and Nelson. And so this would enable students who are going to high school and employees who are working in Nelson to be able to choose to take transit. So right now there is a health connection service that operates 3 days a week. It doesn't accept bus passes. So we would be needing to reshape that and add some more resources to make that into a viable service that would work for commuters. It would be very basic, 3 round trips a day to start, but it's starting it. And what we would do at that time is discontinue the number 15 Perrier and roll that in. So when the bus is coming inbound towards Nelson in the mornings, it would pass through the Perrier area. And then the evenings, when it's outbound back out towards Salmo and Weimer, it would also pass through Perrier. And this would require some changes in the fare structure. So we may have to do a little bit of, have some conversations with Interior Health. Next slide, please. And then the other 2 short-term priorities that have implications for Nelson, although maybe less so, well, somewhat, are some modifications to the Route 10 North Shore. So right now in the mornings, the number 10 bus wakes up in the morning in Nelson, and it goes all the way out to Balfour, and then it starts its service. And you can imagine that that trip from Nelson to Balfour in the morning at 6 or 5:30 is not particularly popular or useful. It exists because the garage facility for that bus is in Nelson. So we would like to explore opportunities to have some sort of a satellite garage facility in Balfour so that the buses could sleep there, which would then give us resources where we could put that time the bus is currently traveling more or less empty into 1 more round trip, or potentially reallocate the services into another part of the system that needs that. And so that wraps up the short-term priorities that we have.
Al might be able to park it out front of his place at Queens Bay. Can you drive the bus now?
Actually, I have 1 more short-term priority. Sorry. Thanks. Yeah, anywhere. They're small buses. Would they be small buses? They could be the first ones in the morning. Anyhow, satellite garages, we have a similar proposal for the Route 20 that starts out in Slocan City. Because again, as you can imagine, at 4:45 in the morning, there's not a lot of bodies heading out to Slocan City. So anyhow, next slide, please, Seth. And then the last of the short-term priorities is addressing that gap that Seth had identified, where you are one of the conventional systems that doesn't actually have a handy dart service. The handy dart type service that the City of Nelson residents receive is somewhat cobbled together through opportunity trips of the little buses that come down from Nakusp and Caslow. So if they're coming down, dropping people off into Nelson, and they have an opportunity to pick someone up who might need a ride for a hospital visit or something of that nature, they can try and accommodate that. But it's really not, it's not a proper custom handy dart service. And there's other components of the handy dart program that come online when you do develop a custom system. There's a taxi saver program. And then, as you may recall from the funding model slide that Seth shared for you, the funding split is also different for custom. The local government pays a smaller share of the cost of that service. So that is something that we would like to explore, is introducing that dedicated weekday handy dart service for the Nelson area. In the spirit of making a comprehensive transit system, I will add that the Kootenay boundary system, so the parts that are trail and area, they do have a custom handy dart service. So the residents across the 2 service areas are receiving different opportunities for transit. So that's something we'd like to try and make consistent. And then following this, there's a number of medium and longer term priorities. I'm not going to get into them, but they are there. A lot of them are actually priorities that had been identified in those earlier 3 documents from 2011 and 2012. And because there has not been an investment of hours, or there has been a very modest investment of hours into your transit system since 2013, there hasn't really been a lot of movement on making those happen. The short-term changes, the remainder of the short-term changes that were blocked out really focus on trying to create greater equity in service and addressing some of the gaps that we see in other places. But we do see much more that is relevant to the Nelson community in the medium and long-term proposals. Probably the biggest game changer amongst that is one I'll just describe. If you were part of the consultation or took the survey, you may recall one of the things we would like to do is explore setting the 99 and the 98 up as an independent service, where they are actually one continuous long route that travels from Nelson through Castlegar and terminates in Trail, and then vice versa. And what that would enable is people who are traveling for medical purposes, who are starting out in Nelson, would be able to board the bus and then not necessarily have to be fighting for seats in Castlegar whenever they need to change buses. So it would simplify that journey for those customers. And for customers who are starting out further afield, like Silverton or Nakusp or Slocan, they would have one less transfer in their journey, which would make it much easier for them as transit passengers. And then lastly, the other advantage that this would give you is the opportunity to have a consistently sized fleet serving those routes. So you can really maximize the seats that are on those buses. And then we could scale that service without disrupting the local services as much. Because right now, the vehicles, the buses that do the 99, some of them are Nelson buses. And if they get held up in Nelson, then the 99 could get held up going out. Same thing, if the 99 gets held up coming in, it has recovery, but if it gets held up too long, it could have implications for the local services. So that is a longer term concept that we have. I think that's not number 31, it's further back. Anyhow, those are the service pieces. And then next we have the infrastructure priorities. And so again, you'll notice here, and infrastructure priorities range from exchanges to garages, park and rides, bus stops, things of that nature. And so what we have here first out is creating some satellite garages for Balfour and Slocan. We are building, or we are working on the plan to develop a new exchange in downtown Nelson, which my colleague James will speak to shortly. And then in terms of the facilities, we would like to try and develop some kind of an overall facility strategy so that we don't run into a situation where you want to expand your service, you want to put hours out there, but we don't have places to maintain the buses. And so then you kind of get hamstrung. So we want to make sure we can plot out what the needs will be and be in a position to address the facility and garage needs we have. And then, of course, ongoing maintenance and upgrades to your bus stops. You know, are there stops that might need a shelter, benches, better signage, better lighting, things of that nature. And next, we're almost at the end. Information priorities. So one of the things that we did do as part of this plan was survey the ridership to find out how they consume their transit information. And it was really interesting. There's a very big urban-rural split. You know, there's parts of your area that don't have self-service. So the hard copy information was still really, really important for your community. So we'd like to continue support for that. We also would like to maybe have some quarterly or biannual printed information for some of the outlying routes, just to assist them. And then there's also a lot of people who are using your transit system that are vision impaired, which they were very well represented during the consultation. So that was interesting. So we want to make sure that we have continued support for them. And then we also heard that there had been some challenges with scheduling of appointments. So Interior Health helps fund some of these smaller routes that come in from outside, but the offices are not necessarily giving people appointment times that align with the health service transit schedules. Yeah, and then lastly, we're also wanting to work on awareness for the urban residents. So I had mentioned that 2% mode share target of people using transit to work. I think that there's an opportunity to raise that, especially once we address some of those pinch points. We are having crush issues on the two. Once we can address some of those problems, Maybe there's some work that we can do to sort of do some marketing, work with some of your employers to really try and encourage people to just try out transit. This can be a great way to contribute to your lower, to the energy reduction of the broader community, and also at the same time maybe address some of the congestion issues that I know the city of Nelson has been grappling with. So yeah, and last slide. So our next steps from this is that we are hoping that we will get endorsement for the concepts here in the plan, and that the city and our other partners in the West Kootenay area will be able to use the plan to inform your 3-year budgets. And then following and also provide the plan to the BC Transit Board, and we'll get it up posted and start working towards trying to make it a reality. And that's it. Are there any questions?
Thank you. I'll get you to, we'll pull down, excellent. Oh, you got that done already. Thanks very much for a good job. We'll move into questions now for you, and I'll start with Councillor Morrison and then Councillor Renwick, then Councillor Page.
Thank you for the really thorough presentation to both of you. My question is when does this have to be approved? Because I'm the city regional district representative, and it seems that I often hear that these transit plans need to be approved, or we'll be working with the same previous transit plan that won't have any improvements or recognize some of these issues that we've had, particularly, let's say, the college issue that we were having in the mornings before COVID came along. So is there a timeline that we have to have this approved by? And what are the impacts if we don't approve it?
I think I'll pass that one over to Seth.
Sure. I'm happy to take that question. Thanks so much, and respectfully through the chair. I'll say that we are working very closely with the regional district right now. I have set up a number of meetings with a number of the regional district electoral area and other municipality, other mayors of municipalities and so forth, to have sort of more detailed conversation, because the plan is very detailed and very comprehensive, as you've have some insight into from Adriana's presentation. And so we're going to do a bit of individual consultation on sort of what proposals are for each area in the plan. The regional district has responsibility for the Kootenay Lake West portion, really the portions that serve that area. The city of Nelson has responsibility for fundamentally the routes 1 and 4, and some influence in the 10 and 9 to the extent that it runs those routes and provides service on those routes. And the regional district of Kootenay boundary in the south end has responsibility for that service area. It's an integrated system, but it's also it's a bunch of unique parts, sort of, and like a puzzle coming together and working together. From the customer's perspective, it's very integrated. From the back end and the way where I work in it with the respective local government staff and your council and the regional district boards, there's 3 distinct and disparate sort of governance structures in making decisions and looking at expansions, prioritizing service, but we agree and try to line up things like fares that really impact the customer.
And then just to add a little bit to Seth's piece, so by endorsing the plan, you are not necessarily committing to expansions. It's just providing that framework from which you can draw on when you are ready to proceed with expansions, and want to plan out your 3-year budgets. So and some of those timelines for us have been thrown a little bit up in the air, actually a lot up in the air with COVID. Normally, this is the time of year that we would be going through our 3-year expansion program, but our previous expansion program from last year was put on hold due to COVID. So there's still a little bit of change happening behind the scenes for us. But BC Transit is very aware of some of the challenges that had been experienced on the 99 and are being experienced still on the 2. There is some hope that some of the challenges on the 99 may be a little bit slower coming back if the flux of international students for this upcoming fall is a bit lower than it had been previously. But again, we don't know.
Mr. Mayor?
Oh, Kevin, yeah.
Just a couple things. I know when we looked at the 99 the last time, we had one morning run that, the early morning run was basically nobody on it. And, the next run was over capacity. And we certainly talked about how do we adjust that, but, that early run to be at a time that was when students actually wanted to use it because they seemed to choose being overly packed versus, taking an earlier bus. So it didn't seem when we did that exercise that it was actually a capacity problem. It looked like a scheduling problem. So I don't know if you've looked at that specifically. And that's certainly what we discovered in whatever 2019 or whenever it was normal.
Through the chair,
Yes.
one of the challenges is
You got frozen. Spin this whole can.
Remote doesn't
to
replace
have
transit.
additional vehicles available.
Oh, we had lost you for a bit.
Bill type.
Yeah, I don't think it was additional vehicles available. Our garage and transit supervisor Jody Cayley felt we could make that work from the available vehicles.
Seth, can you fill in the gaps here at all?
Yeah, I'm not sure I can give the exact same answer. I think this is very much a planning sort of question. But certainly I think there may be a bus location issue where the buses are in Nelson. I see she's come back. Should we hand the baton back?
Yeah, we lost
Yeah,
you
we
there
lost.
we lost you for the last couple of minutes.
And I don't want to belabor this one because we do have another presentation coming on. So if we're moving this along, one of the things on that part is some of the things that BC Transit's innovating on is they're be able to pay, and there may be some options of maybe having it less of a ride if you take the trip like an hour later or an hour before. So those may be some ways of maybe incentivizing using the available buses and schedules that we have that are not full, and moving some of the students that we seem to have the backlog with onto those particular routes through maybe a savings. But anyway, those will all be things that we'll look at when we get closer to understanding what's normal. We certainly don't expect even for 2021 for the traffic to increase, especially with the timing of those from other countries being able to come back and ride the bus or come and go to school at Selkirk.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah, I know
Kevin, just a moment, please. I think I have to give a bit of leeway here we have 3 councillors that wanted to speak. One has. So Councillor Renwick and Councillor Page were next.
Thank you, Mayor Dooley. Well, this was a question for Adriana and Seth. I don't know if you can answer it or not, but it's about the fleet. And I don't know if you chimed in on the last presentation, but it was about the West Kootenay 100% renewable energy plan. And Nelson, we are kind of a big deal in climate change. And I do know that BC Transit has been testing out some electric buses, rechargeable, and just wondering what the plan is there. What's the rollout? How's it going? And when can we get one?
I will pass that one over to Seth. That's a fleet issue. It's a great question. I know there's been a lot of interest from your community. It came out really strongly during our workshops and consultation.
Sure.
If we have Seth. We have Seth?
I'm happy to answer that question. Our fleet people, we have a low carbon fleet program. I gave a presentation to another municipality earlier this afternoon on that program and spoke in depth about battery electric buses. And we are sort of pushing that team to come out because we know cities like Nelson across the province, but Nelson more than most is particularly enthusiastic about our battery electric bus program. We are moving quickly to procure and introduce the first deployment of 10 battery electric buses in Victoria, hopefully later this year, but certainly by the end of 2022. Subsequent deployments will consist of heavy duty buses, which is the sort of standard 40-foot bus, but then we'll in stages be replacing all of our buses with battery electric buses, and we'll have a completely battery electric fleet across the province by the year 2040, and be purchasing only battery electric buses around 2030. So in about 10 years, we'll be moving to 100% battery electric. And so this is a phased approach, and quite ambitious, but there's about 2.5 years of setting up and making sure that the infrastructure works on the ground to have that charging infrastructure in the respective yard. So we'll be carrying out that process on a province-wide basis as that program sort of proceeds. And my colleague James works with that team of people more closely than I do, but we're excited about that program, and we are happy to bring a presentation as that program proceeds to closer to fruition.
Thank you. Just make sure we're close to the top of the list, okay?
Absolutely.
Councillor Page.
Well, I guess Strokely answered on the electric side of things for now. We'll wait. Hopefully we'll be at the front of the line somewhere. A couple questions. I wanted to see what was teased out in the public consultation around Sunday bus service. It's definitely the thing in connection with transit I think I hear the most about, and what we might expect in terms of some of that service expansion into Sunday.
Yeah, that's a great question. We did hear about Sunday service. However, as that triangle indicated, there's actually a fair amount of work that we have yet to do before we can entertain doing something as comprehensive as adding a full other service day. And one of the other aspects of this plan, which you may note if you had looked at the medium and long-term actions, is that once we get to these medium and long-term actions, we're looking to do things at the same time across the urban centers that are covered within the plan. So the same day, the same year that Nelson gets Sunday service, we would also be introducing Sunday service for Castlegar and also Trail, and optimally also a connector on that day. You know, there's a lot of attention on the connector. Actually, we heard the most about the connector. The connector outshone everything, which was interesting because COVID really illuminated that the workhorse for you within Nelson is actually the number 2. You know, the local service stayed very, very stable in terms of ridership compared to some other parts of the province and compared to the 99. So yes, there was a lot of interest in the Sunday service. Yes, we have it in the plan. It is further down. We have introducing introducing the Sunday service across all 3 communities at the same time, potentially at the same time as a Sunday connector comes in. So yes, it's there, and we'll see how that goes. I will note that Sunday service was also in the 2013 plans, restoring that. And again, there hasn't really been a lot of movement in terms of trying to grow the system over the last number of years. So there is some catch up to do, especially relative to the degree of growth that you've been seeing. And we do want to try and fix the places where there's some challenges before we address some of that Sunday service.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions? I had a couple of quick ones here. I don't know, hopefully it'll be quick, but just a reminder to council that any change in service, there's a cost attached to that as well. So it doesn't come free of charge to anybody. But I would like to mention a couple of things. The Salmo, I'm glad to see Salmo is going to be included in the routing going forward, because it's a growing community that depends heavily on Nelson for a lot of its commerce and employment. And I think it's a corridor that is growing rapidly and has been somewhat neglected as far as transit went for the last number of years. The other thing, ironically enough, my wife and I were on a little bit of a drive on Sunday to do a hike, and we happened to be in Slocan Village, and we were actually talking about the bus service there. And I find in the rural areas in particular, the signage for bus stops and the actual bus stops are not that inviting. They're probably in the ideal place from your perspective, but if you're to live in the rural area, you're taking your life in your hands to stand at some of those bus stops with there's no shelters, no lights, and nothing more than a sign that says bus stop on. There's nothing leading you to that ahead of time to say there's a bus stop ahead or whatever the case may be. And I think encouraging people to take the bus has a lot more to do than just putting the bus on the road. It has a lot to do with the comfort of waiting for the bus, finding the proper stop to pick that bus up. And I just wonder if there's any plans going forward to enhance that experience of the ridership. And I know there's a number of stops along the North Shore going up to Balfour area that any day of the week they can have a trailer parked in front of the bus stop, or a backhoe or a ATV or you name it. So I'm just wondering if that's something you're looking at as well.
Yes, that is an excellent question. So a number of the stops in the rural areas are actually on Ministry of Highway rights of ways.
Yeah.
And it is the practice now to not have bus stops on highway shoulders, because it often creates situations where people have to run across that highway in one direction of travel. So the ministry is actually has expressed some degree of interest of removing some of those stops. However, they are used. So it's a balance between maintaining access for those people while trying to keep it safe. I know that the regional district has been fairly avid at using some of the minor betterments grants programs to improve some of those stops. They had to put in solar LED lights some time ago. Unfortunately, a number of those units have been vandalized. And they also have some wooden shelters that they've been putting in. One of the pieces that we would like to see is an improvement of park and ride capacity along the rural routes. So the people who are living beyond walking distance will be able to be dropped off or park and ride to access the buses. Yeah. And that is something that we do have within the infrastructure portion of the plan. But yes, certainly ongoing improvements to the stops is definitely key, especially on those dark highways and in the winter. Yeah. So yeah, very good observation.
And the park and ride is definitely a huge advantage. If that can be, that's an excellent way to solve that problem. The other one, I'll make this as quick as possible, is, and I brought this up a number of times in the past, and that is integrating with the school bus service. I know there's a lot of logistics there, but those school buses travel those roads empty one way most of the time, and it's just I'll leave that with you for now. But the other one for us in the municipality is, could the bus potentially go through Railtown when it's traveling out on the Castlegar route and in? And if you know where Railtown is, that's just below the highway there. So there's a number of businesses employed. There's a lot of people employed in Railtown, believe it or not. And it's probably just as handy to cut onto the highway there, that shortcut, as it is to take the highway where nobody's getting on or off. It's just a thought. So. And it would help us in the development of Railtown and potentially help for the farmers market as well.
I'm definitely aware of Railtown. I believe once upon a time there was actually some exploration of having the exchange there over a decade ago now, well before me. And I'm aware that there are also plans for some possibly redevelopment in that area. So it's definitely something that we could consider. We would have to look at some of the timing and for making the turns on and off the highway. So that's something that we can look into a bit more, particularly as we are able to improve and add more trips onto the 99. One of the things that came up quite often during the consultation was having access to the airport through the Route 99. However, that bus is already so oversubscribed that we would be setting people up to have a full bus pass them by at the airport. And I would be cautious of creating a similar situation for residents of Railtown, whereby the bus is already nearly full when it comes through. So we want to balance the provision of new service with the expansion of service availability to newer and growing parts of the community. But certainly having connectivity to the transit system for Railtown would make sense when that area does start to build out, for sure. And maybe even in the shorter term, depending on you know what expansion resources are available out there.
Thank you very much. Thank you. All right, so hearing no more questions then, thanks very much for taking time out this evening to come and present to us. And we've had a really good working relationship with BC Transit for many, many years. And we're looking forward to continuing that, and very excited about the way the regional system has sort of developed over the last 10 years or so. So thanks for all your help. And I'm not sure what Kevin is these days, but he was a big player in that development of the regional transit system when he was with you at BC Hydro. So.
Oh,
BC
he's still around.
He's still around, is he? Yeah, okay. Good.
Yes.
Thank you. All right, take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right, folks, onward and upward. We're still on the transit mode. And next up is our transit exchange. And staff on BC Transit presenting the results of the, oh, sorry, that must be the wrong one. Yeah, transit exchange, sorry. Of the stakeholder consultation directed by Council concerning the relocation of Nelson Transit Exchange from Warden Baker to the 300 block of Victoria. And there's a package of information here that I'm sure you've gone through. And with that, I don't know if either Kevin or
no,
Colin,
we're gonna have
Colin wishes to introduce this. Colin?
Yes, if I can. Yes. So we've got Alex Toom from Development Services is going to lead us, but we've also got James Wadsworth, who's been with us through the beginning stages of the transit exchange process, and he is the lead from BC Transit on this. So I think there'll be a bit of a tag team, but I also know that James has his own presentation as well. So
thanks. Welcome, James.
Thank you. So we could do it two ways. Alex could give an overview, or I could just dive right into the presentation. Maybe
I'm thinking
I'd let you go right into it, James.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
So I will share my screen, and so we got I'm hoping you can see that.
Yep.
Okay. So yeah, we've got some really great information that we're going to use to inform further design, and we've looked at it and we've been using it to interpret what option do people is really going to satisfy the most people. So the objective is to give you just an update on that engagement, but also briefly walk you through the process to date to give you some context. The context here is, as Adrienne has shown, you know, there's a vision for transit in the region with significant service expansions, and that needs to be supported with infrastructure such as a transit exchange. So we did the study with Watt Consulting, where we developed a number of options with staff from planning and from operations to come up with a few different options for the 300 block of Victoria that we could take out to the public and see if we could move forward with one that we'd like to advance. So we took those options to council, and council asked us to go do some public engagement. And once we're done this public engagement and we've agreed that we have an option that we want to move forward, we would go and do the business case to access the provincial funding and make the application for the federal funding to move us forward, so that we could come to an agreement to go out and build an exchange and move forward. The option that we're recommending to move forward with is the one we're calling option C2. I'll get more into the description here, but we think this is the option that best meets the local stakeholders' needs on the block, as well as transit operations. So I'll just get into a bit further. Just a reminder, we did come to council on the 13th. We got direction, as noted, to go and do that public engagement. Briefly, the design features, we're trying to find space for 5 or more buses so that we've got room for the future. And in talking about, we really want to make sure that it's a great spot for the customers in terms of experience. So making sure they have shelters, benches, and bike racks, as well as a public washroom and more enhanced pedestrian realm. The first option that we developed was option A, which is on the south side of Victoria Street. I call it the library side. It retains the most parking on the street. It's better in terms of for transit passengers because they don't have to cross the street to make transfers. It has, I think I mentioned, the least impact on parking, but it does have some challenges. It would make this block one way in the downtown, which would be unique for this area. It does lead to a bit more inefficient transit routing to get to the right side of the block. And as you can see, it fits 4 buses well, and the 5th bus is kind of hanging out there a little bit like we don't, not perfectly. So it does have some challenges. We have an option that we took out to the public. The B options didn't make the cut, but we had 2 versions of what we call option C. This one has transit on both sides of the street. The street is 2 ways here. The sidewalk is a bit narrower, so we can still fit in shelters, but they'd be smaller. And passengers would have to walk across the street to transfer. And it also does have some impact on the businesses on the west side of the street. And it has the highest level of parking impact, where if we do it in this configuration, we can only keep 3 spots being, I'll call it in front of where Thor's Pizza is. And the other option that we have was what we called C2, which it doesn't fit 7 buses, but it fits 5. It introduces a crosswalk, which kind of breaks the street up. It has room for 5 to 6 buses, and it does have less impact on the businesses on the west end of the street, which was clear through the public engagement that was an issue. It does, again, have narrower sidewalks, but we've introduced a crosswalk here so that it's easier for passengers to transfer between the buses instead of running across the street. And it does allow us to have a few more parking stalls. And I should mention that, I think it says this in the report, but if we're moving away from Baker, where we would still have a good set of bus stops for customers to use it down there, there's that allows us to add 10 more parking stalls down there, which is probably a good thing, where it could be it's well needed. Just a brief reminder here in terms of costs. The C1 and C2 options, they have a bit lower transit operating costs because the buses aren't having to circulate the block as much to set up in the right location. And the capital costs for the C options is a few $100,000 lower than option A, which it can be a good thing. And they do actually hold more room for buses. And we don't have it in the costs here yet, but there would be a cost to add a new set of bus stops on Baker to, as we move the transit exchange from where it is. And a reminder again that the local government's share of this cost is approximately 20%. So these options that we're looking at, if you were to look at it on an annual basis, as part of your transit operating budget, the new transit exchange would cost approximately $35,000 to $70,000 a year, depending on the option. that we picked. So this is all context information for the engagement that we did. So the engagement, our objectives are we weren't going out to talk to people about what location transit should be in. That was already decided before this, but we were going out there to talk to them about the designs, to try and find a design that really worked for transit needs, but also worked for the people on the block and the transit customers. So we made sure that we were engaging the stakeholders adjacent to the transit exchange as part of the engagement, but we also wanted to give the general public the opportunity to comment on it, as well as the customers, and just raise awareness of this plan that we're developing. And so like Alex did a lot of work here from the city to lead communications in December to get out to the stakeholders through mail what we were trying to do. It was out on social media, online advertising, and he also engaged the Chamber of Commerce. We had a little project page on the city website. We did a virtual stakeholders workshop on January 20th. Should note that, before I forget, that we had 6 people attend that workshop and had a good conversation with them. It's, sometimes it's really helpful to talk to people, walk them through the options to find out what's important and what's not. And we also, I think, had 23 letters from the public who couldn't attend the workshop who wanted to provide their comments. And we did the public survey as well in February. Again, with the virtual information session, we spoke with 6 people, and what really came up was on-street parking is really important to those businesses on the block, and especially in terms of Thor's Pizza, making sure that there was space for commercial loading of their supplies for their business. And there was a lot of concern around the establishment of a public washroom, and the public washroom concept that we were looking at is similar to on Baker Street with the Portland Loo. And that was on the corner. I should have mentioned when we looked at the option, the location that we thought would work best was on the corner of Kootenay and Victoria. And there was some asks if we could move that to the police station side, but there's a lot of concerns in doing that around impacting the sight lines for the corner there, with vehicles looking up the street to see where people, other cars coming. We did do a public survey, and we had 145 responses. And interestingly, in this, option A was scored the highest. But the other thing also to note here is that there were a lot of, over a third of people didn't select an option, but were unsure what option to pick regarding the design. And option C2 came out at just under 30%. And when we dive into those, the people on the stakeholders and businesses adjacent to Victoria Street, option C2 was still very similar, was not as high as option A. And in our interpretation of that was really coming down to what we talked about, which was the parking. And when we had those stakeholders meetings, it was really asked, can you keep transit towards the other side of the block so they can keep the parking in front of their business and have the buses down at the other end. And so that's a lot of what led us towards C2. And then when we look at what the transit customers had an interest in, we only had 17 responses from transit customers. And again, there was a bit of a higher preference for option A, and a lot more people unsure. And I would, my interpretation of what I read was that people are used to it who use transit on Baker Street, but the way we're setting up this plan is they can still board and leave the bus on Baker Street as they do today. It would just be in a slightly different location. So there's still a really good transit access on Baker Street. The other thing we did as part of this is we discussed the options with Nelson Transit Operations, because they're, again, as well as the customers, they're the ones who are going to be using this site, and they know the city really well and what works in terms of circulation. And they did have a lot of concerns with option A around additional bus circulation. And so they had a preference for C2 for that reason. Also works better with where there's signals in town for them to make their transit movements efficiently. They also liked having the crosswalk in the middle of the block, so the passengers could transfer between the buses. That's another reason why they liked C2, and they felt that would make it easier for the customers to know where to find their bus. And they also mentioned that when detours are happening in the city, that they felt that this option worked a lot better for them from a detour perspective, and it has the room for future service expansion. And so that's kind of an overview of what's in the staff report. But outside of that, once we're ready to move forward here, we're ready to do the business case and make the grant application to the federal government. And, when we're successful, then we would work with the city to do a project agreement between the city and BC Transit to deliver the project. And then there is another step before we're ready to do the ribbon cutting. We will need to do the detailed design work, and it's really great that we have all of this information now from public engagement, because it will help us inform the design and deliver a design that really is more supportable from the stakeholders, takes into their consideration and maintaining the access to their business to best meet their needs. And so once we're past design work, the design phase, then we would potentially be looking at moving forward with tendering and construction in the fall of 2022. So that's my portion of it. And let me just stop sharing here. I'm having my Zoom technology issues, so
that's okay. We're all in the same boat.
Okay, there we go.
So, Alex, do you want to speak on your RFD or anything that, or take questions from council? Do you have thoughts on what your next steps were, Alex?
I wouldn't have anything to add. James and I certainly worked on this presentation together, so I would just leave it open to council for any questions or comments.
Okay, Jason.
Mayor,
sorry. We still have to get your screen down so I can see all of council.
I know. I've just become smart enough to figure it out.
There we go. Thank you, Jason. Yeah, thanks for your presentation. First up is Councillor Page, Councillor Lochtenberg, and then Councillor Woodward.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. My question, I think, is directed to Mr. Toom about the letters of comment we received from the property owners in that area for parking opportunities, and specifically the loading zone request coming from some of the restaurants. I was wondering what additional considerations we can put in place or ways we can support them. I see in front of Kootenay Health, do we have opportunities for angled parking anywhere around there? That road seems awfully wide at that entrance, but I'm certainly not a traffic designer. Can we convert some of that area into loading so they're not coming off of Baker Street? I think that is quite a jog to bring things up, but can you let me know what kind of considerations we can expect now that we have this feedback from everyone?
Absolutely. I think James might have something to add to that as well too, in that I get a subsequent step now, which the turnaround here, we've been receiving letters until just a week or two ago. So there hasn't been time yet to look at the design, and correct me if I'm wrong, James, my understanding would be that we'd have to go back to the design team if that's the direction BC Transit and Council would like to go in to look for more loading zone opportunities around that area. But we'd have to do that design work, and we leave that design work to the traffic engineers. The one sort of bandage solution, I'll call it that, that we did start discussing with the block stakeholders, beginning with that January stakeholder meeting, was the opportunity to use the laneway as loading zone. That wasn't received well by everyone who attended. That's and certainly reflected in the letters as well. But it is an option that's under our traffic bylaw right now, that the laneways can be used for loading for up to 15 minutes. So there's certainly other impacts on laneway users when you have trucks in there, but we do have that on a daily basis in other places in the city where large semis are loading and unloading in the lanes. And then that would represent about a half block distance from Thor's and El Taco, etc. So that would be the sort of one solution that wouldn't require a design change, but certainly a design, adding a loading zone somewhere else is going to mean taking away parking as well.
I think what I would say is right now, when we're at this level of design, it's 30%. So there's still 70% to go. So I think it's good that we've got the stakeholder information to help us confirm what the scope is of the next round of design. So I think if there is items that council would like us to include in the scope of that design work, it's probably good to capture them now. I think in verbally or if staff is, maybe we need to summarize like what some of those are if more comments come up.
Thank you.
So I think we can look at that.
Sorry, thank you. Councillor Lochtenberg and then Councillor Woodward.
Thanks. First a comment and then a question. The comment to those businesses on Victoria Street and around the new transit exchange is that with Jim Reimer's property and with the enthusiasm we've seen students pick up the 99, I can foresee the transit exchange, assuming, and this is a question, that the 99 would connect there. Yeah, it would. I can see that being a real hive of activity for those businesses. I really think with Jim Reimer's property, and all of those kids getting to that transit exchange, you could see Thor's and El Taco and others. And hopefully even some of the professional, like the doctors, the dentists around that area, should see a big uptick in business. Just the kind of business, the commuting business we'd like to see in Nelson. So there's a silver lining there. On the question side, do you see a possibility, given that deliveries could happen? I know they don't usually or always happen off hours, but is there some way to schedule deliveries around the buses so they can use the same area? Like particularly, I know the buses don't run, before 6 o'clock. They don't run after, say, a certain time. Is that a possibility?
I would imagine that, operationally it could happen. For example, if you had, deliveries on Sunday, currently don't have Sunday transit, for example. However, the message that we got through those letters from area businesses is that, which is, not surprising, I think, to me, that, deliveries are very sporadic. So, and it's out of their control as well, too, right? So, El Taco isn't able to, tell their suppliers, you have to be here between 12 and 1 because at 1:05 a bus is going to come. And they say, one delivery truck, maybe 2 weeks out of 10 will come at a certain time, and then the rest, the time it'll be at different times, and that has to do with obviously their operations, even weather conditions on the mountain passes, etc. So it doesn't sound like their operations are reliable enough for us to be able to consider that, or for them to want to consider that either.
Alex, with option C there, that loading zone is retained. The loading zone that's there currently is roughly in the same spot. It's beside that hydro box. The existing loading zone?
No, there's, let me just zoom into here as well. I have it open here. There's 2 parking spaces that are there right now on the option C2 design. So
but is there not a
that
loading
could certainly.
Is there not a loading zone right in front of El Taco?
Yeah, currently there is, but on the C2 design, those are 2 parking spaces that are there. Like on the theoretical hypothetical design option that's being presented here.
So the question I have then is, are people asking for the loading zone as well as 2 parking spaces, or they're asking for the loading zone and not have the 2 parking spaces?
Yeah, we didn't get into that specific, design conversation with them, right? About where the loading. They're saying we want to have a loading zone there. That would be for a subsequent conversation for sure. And when the designers did this design work last year in the summer, the assumption was that the priority was going to be parking first and foremost. But yeah, we certainly had the message that loading is just as important.
Okay, thank you. All right, so Councillor Lockenberg, you okay?
Yeah, I'm just happy to hear that loading could be considered a priority over the parking on that area, given that the amount of customer traffic should go up dramatically given all of that activity. Yeah. So definitely worth considering.
Thank you. Councillor Woodward.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. I was just wondering, in terms of your calculations, do you think this location will be able to handle increase? I mean, is there enough built into the C2 plan that you think that the accommodation of the traffic and more buses will be there? Would we eventually have to move it across to, or move another section across to Victoria Street or something? Do you know what I mean? Like, can it expand? Is it going to be big enough for the long haul?
And certainly that's why I think the option of C2 is the one that allows for that expansion, Councillor Woodward, but also does, in the meantime, while we're not there, doesn't impact the businesses or helps out with the impact of parking. The other thing we talk about a bit too is the further towards Sharon Nelson area, that block there tends to be a place, that has a bit more free spaces as far as, places to park. And again, we can look at that. Mayor was even saying, hey, maybe there's an opportunity for some angle parking or some additional parking spots around the corner a bit. So again, we always look for that ability. We know that we're taking some away in that particular area, but we also are looking at adding some on board there, a number of spots. So again, it's not trying to penalize that area, but it is the place for the bus. And we also want to be very respectful of the businesses, the homeowners, and some of the smells. Well, the hope is here, you heard from BC Transit today, that eventually we'll have, it's not coming tomorrow, but eventually there'll be electric buses. So some of those things on fumes and noise should really be, less of an issue. Again, the idea is, Mr. Toom spoke to on the alleyways. Is there a way to find a loading zone that works? Because the last thing, it's sort of hard. It's like, hey, we want parking, but also we want a place to unload our vehicles. So it's a real bit of a catch-22 on that. And again, some of the other conversations as well is, the bathroom where we've currently got it located. Is there a place that's maybe closer to the crosswalk that's in the middle of the street, up towards the library a bit? So those are some things that definitely we'll help take back. We've heard the complaints. We want to, or the concerns. We want to, do our best to mitigate, and that will be the plan. So, but great question, Councillor Woodward.
And in terms of bus services, we know we have some of the regional routes with the smaller buses that lay over, where in between trips they're there for a bit longer than we'd like, and we know that we can send them down to is it the rail in front of the visitor center? I believe we could send them there to Railtown to do some, so we're not, those buses aren't here, so you kind of get more life out of the exchange here.
Yeah.
Just supplemental?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. I just wanted to say, I really appreciate the work. I know this is super challenging, but I want to connect that with what other councillors have said is that, you you're adding a lot of traffic flow. Those businesses should do quite well at the other end of the block. Plus, you got the library and the government building there, and it feels like a really good synergy if we can get the layout correct. You're having a lot of services are right there, quick bites to eat. It feels like a good mix you've got going on. If we can figure out with the business owners and the people living there the best option, it seems like a great piece of work. So thank you very much.
Councillor Page.
I won't flog this horse too much. When we're looking at I'm hearing a lot of consensus around C2, and I think the community was coming out with that as well. One of the things that strikes me that is about the comfort and appeal of this particular street when we're done, and something I'm not seeing in the designs is treescapes and organics. Like, is there opportunity or anywhere within this boulevard, if we're going to be redoing this, to add to the streetscape, so we can friendly up this area, and over time it will grow into a beautiful space for these buses to stop and this pedestrian traffic that we're envisioning for this area? I guess that's to staff. It's totally out of left field.
What I would say is yes to that. There's in some of the, if you looked at some of the options, there's some boxes that are highlighted as green. Those could be hard surfaced, or you could do some landscaping there, but you'd probably want to do landscaping that's, something that the city's selecting that is on the easier, lower maintenance side. We've done that on other projects.
You do have snow removal and so forth to manage there as well, to get buses in and out of it. But it's a really good point to make it beautify it as much as possible. The one thing that I would suggest going forward, should the decision be to go with the C2 plan, would be to put that washroom right in the middle of the block, right where the crosswalk is. It doesn't need to be tucked around that corner, in that, what I would call that business district there, but moved up into a place where there's some people and where there's some lighting and an opportunity to continue to maintain it and look after it. In fact, this may not go down very well, but if there was an opportunity to even tuck it into the library, in the corner of the library there somehow, it might be even better.
Yeah, that was definitely going to be my question, given that we have two government buildings there. Is there not an opportunity for signage, just to direct people to a public washroom through a service agreement?
Yeah, we ran into certainly the library itself, and having that as a location for people to use the transit as not the best option. That's why I think, again, having another outdoor city washroom would be important. I think about even when I started working for the city, there was really nothing. And I think now we have one at the end of Hall Street. We have one at Hall and Baker, and now to have another one here, plus the ones down at Railtown. We've really started to actually improve that access. And again, I'm hearing, the concerns that are there. It is outside of the police station. Again, I think that there's a number of things here that we will take back. And as part of that detailed design, as Mr. Woodsworth spoke to, that it sounds like, looking at some tree landscape, or how do we do it that's lower maintenance, but all the things that you're talking about, whether it's shelters and some shade and bike racks and washroom, and really have a thorough go around on what will be the best fit.
Because that's a pretty wide sidewalk on the library side there. It's double standard at least. There's quite a bit of space there.
Yeah, and I don't know how much of the change comes in with having the buses being able to pull in, you see, on either side, and have two-way traffic, right? So now when you think about it, you've got a bus on each side and then a vehicle on each side. So just not as much room, Mayor, as we think.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Renwick.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I have to say I'm quite concerned with all the letters that we've been getting lately, and I guess I want to express my concern in that we need to do what we can to keep the impact down as much as possible. Certainly, the mayor just spoke about the washroom, which I think is a big one for a lot of those people. I don't know if James has seen some of the letters lately, but a lot of those people just don't want that bus transfer on there at all. And I don't know if there was another option on the table or not. Of course, we were just presented with the A, C, and C2. But the other thing that comes to mind, and I don't know the route, but that block of Kootenay Street where the Bank of Montreal is, where there's angled parking on both sides, it's fairly narrow. Are we going to have buses passing one another, coming and going on that block, or do they access from the block where a block down at the start of the 200 block of Baker Street? I do have some concerns there with the width of that block of Kootenay Street from Baker to Victoria.
I know that our garage and transit staff had looked at that, and again, that was one of the preferences of not having the one-way coming in, was be able to have less route changes and to be able to time the buses so that they were able to access those areas. So whether or not they go down by the Savoy and up, or are crossing, or it's the one bus turning right, those are good questions that I don't have an exact answer for. But that's certainly something that our bus drivers or our staff have looked at and have felt comfortable that they can certainly operate that, and it was a better solution, they felt, than having the one-way only option in trying to get the buses out onto Stanley there.
From what I recall, Colin, yes, they did a really good look at how the buses circulate and make the turning movements, and that's why they were strongly in favor of C2.
Right.
And
I also,
sorry, Colin.
and I also, no, I understand, and again, for Councillor Renwick, we have gone through this on locations, and the idea of having a small bus transferring people from up and down Baker Street kind of thing was not something that's really in a BC Transit mode. So unfortunately, those are some of those other options kind of came off the table, and then we have gone through a lot of effort to choose this site, and this is the site that's chosen. That's why you've, as far as where you've come in, Councillor, you may say, well, wait a second, I didn't have that decision making, but this, sort of those previous councils, and we've kind of landed here. Now we're in the kind of trying to get the best option with the least challenges to the owners and businesses in the area. We are cognizant, and again, I certainly respect that. We've had certain challenges on, say, in particular the Baker and Hall washroom. I don't necessarily know that translates automatically to having one that's a bit maybe more out in the open and in a business area that we would have in this location. And again, being close to the police station, you're hoping that you would have a bit more of the opportunity or the deterrent of having that. And again, if you think of some of these, also we've talked about lighting and different deterrents that we can try to use to make this as safe and friendly as possible.
Thank you. Councillor Page, did you have another question?
Yeah, I'm looking at the lot lines here on the other side of the street from library and the police across from Telus. Looks like there's quite a lot of right of way along the south side of Victoria there. Is that a place we're considering or have considered looking at putting washrooms? Like, I would have assumed, aside looking from this, that those properties went right to the road, to the sidewalk, but it looks like there's quite a generous, well, equal to what we have on the other side, easement or right of way along the south side of the Victoria Street on the 400 block.
So Councillor Page, are you speaking that it's the portion that's on Stanley Street itself?
Like the lawn of the Legion, the whole front part of it looks like it's actually just right away for the road.
Yeah, I'm not sure which diagram you're seeing that has that. Is that the?
I missed a little bit. My connection just sort of dropped out. But you're talking about the 400 block of Victoria on Victoria Street.
The street is narrow, but the right of way for a street is the same as what it is on the 300 block.
It is, yeah, and that was an earlier iteration from the 2011 BC Transit Service Review. That was one of the original recommendations, was to have it on that block. However, for the council, first of all, council at the time wasn't interested in pursuing that at the time, as I understand. And secondly, in terms of operations and budgeting, the cost, as you say, the right of way is there, but the road isn't. So the costs, capital costs, are going to be significantly more expensive in order to shore up the embankment there on the south side of the road, sort of widen the road. There would be a lot of land retention work that would be necessary, and arguably further disruption to those properties. Even though their property line is where their property line is, they're essentially it would likely result to a much further sort of hardship for them than what we're proposing on the 300 block of Victoria Street, where there wouldn't be any sort of loss of that kind of green space or changes to the bank.
Thanks, Alex. Thank you very much. Are there any further questions?
Just, Mayor, that we will do our best to alleviate as many concerns as possible. But in the end, some of these people, there's going to be some people that are unhappy with the choices that we make. But I think that we will do our best to try to mitigate them.
So just so you know, Colin, we haven't made the choice yet. And that comes back to a future meeting for confirmation on one of these designs. Is that right?
Yes, Mayor, we will be coming to the April 13th meeting to ask for council's direction.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think before we.
Any further questions? Because between now and then, staff's going to have to try and react to, what council has in mind. And it's pretty clear from tonight's conversation that everybody is cognizant of some of the concerns people are raising. And we'll try to address them in the presentation that's coming back to the next meeting, best as we possibly can. I think Councillor Lochtenberg hit the nail on the head. If you put this presentation together with the one we just had, I would say the upside is considerable based on the numbers of people that are starting to use our transit system, and going forward, the number increases that are potentially going to be increasing over the next 5 to 10 years, with additional routes coming on from Salmo and changes to the system out onto the North Shore and into Trail Castlegar region and up to Slocan Valley, that there'll be a lot of volume of traffic going through here. And I noticed in Vancouver, when it's interesting, a lot of businesses have set up shop at the very end of a rapid transit line, so they can capture that traffic when it comes off the ALRT or whatever the case may be. So there's in fact a lot of huge developments built up on the end of a transit line, for that matter, to capture that traffic. So hopefully we can people will be able to understand and see that opportunity that's there. But having said that, this will come back to us in April for a final decision and potentially modification if that's the case. So thanks everybody for your good work. I really appreciate the time that everybody's putting into this. And thanks for your work, Jason, helping us work through this. And for Colin and Kevin, I know that we've been swamped at the staff level, Alex, in your planning department, and trying to put all this stuff together is not that easy sometimes. So thank you very much.
And just, Mayor, just so when we do come on the April 13th meeting, again, we are just in the business case, so we still have to, there's still a long way to go here as far as having that, here's what our plan is, having that go off, go to the feds for approval and then again, the likelihood from James is that we wouldn't hear probably until fall even if we were successful, kind of thing.
Okay. Sorry.
There is a. Oh,
I'll
say something very.
I think that's a really good point, Colin, because there was tens of thousands of dollars in difference in some of the selections that we would make here as well, right? So that has to be taken into account as well. And James, I think I called you Jason, which I thought that's what I heard earlier on, but it's James, right?
It's James, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Go ahead.
Can I just say one thing is that if we need to do further design work to get the right design, and if we wait till after the federal application, the next round of design work we can do at a 20% cost to local government instead of a 50% cost. So there is some it's good to take this input now, and when we get the sale price for the design work, you know, it might be worth waiting to address it all then. But we'll leave that with you guys to make that decision.
Yeah, thank you. Now, how does that mesh with what we heard earlier from BC Transit, though? Did I hear the exchange doesn't impact any of their decisions around upgrading or rearranging their routes?
No, in fact, it benefits, I think, as far as having that the time and the ability for the buses to move around in circulation.
Yeah. I'm talking more about talking more about the length of time for the decision making on this.
Well, even the Transit Future Service Plan, even the short term is quite a distance away. Everything for BC Transit takes, you know, have to get in the hopper, and then it's even like the following year before they even actually implement, just because of the ability for buses and changes in riders guides and those sorts of things, Mayor. So it is a long process. Yeah.
Thank you, Colin. Yeah. Everybody okay? Anything you wanted to add, James, before we shut down?
No, I'd just like to say one thing is a lot of communities want to do transit-oriented development, but you guys have such a great downtown. You already have the transit-oriented development, and I think that's one of the reasons you do so well in terms of ridership. So it's great to be able to put transit in a downtown like this where, you know, there is they go together. So it's great. So thank you. It was great to do the presentation.
One last question for Alex. Alex, how many parking stalls are we recreating at the old depot?
We had calculated it was about 9 or 10 parking spaces. Of course, where the buses right now, there's those 4 bus stops, so there's that portion. But then, not having the bus stop at Ward and Baker, we would be able to convert the west side of Ward Street between Baker and Victoria into angled parking, and that would be where you'd see the biggest parking gain.
Okay, so even though we'd be losing some here, which is not good for, you know, some people might suggest that's not good, we're actually increasing by a couple, 3 or 4 parking spots in the downtown core.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Alex. Thank you very much. All right, folks, thanks everybody. And,
thank you very much.
Unless there's anything else you wanted to discuss, I'd like to call a motion to adjourn, please. Councillor Renwick and Councillor Luchtenberg. Any questions or comments? All in favor? Thank you. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, James.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, James.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex.